Hmm. Okay, wonderful. All right, welcome everyone to our webinar today, Servant Leadership in a Time of Crisis. My name is Adrienne Billis. I am the Director of Leadership at the Episcopal Church Foundation. I welcome you. I also have my colleague. I'm going to go this way. It's kind of like the Brady Bunch, discovering where people are on the screen. Riley Banky, who is the Executive Director of Gathering of Leaders, but she is also in partnership working with us at the Episcopal Church Foundation as a program director, Jackie of all trades, a really wonderful addition. So I'd like to welcome Martin before I pass it off to him and just do a little bit of tech. So why don't I just do the tech here, and then Martin, I'll introduce you. So to everyone who's watching today, welcome. We are recording on Zoom. We are also live on Facebook as well. During the course of this webinar, I will be monitoring our chat box, which if you look down at the bottom of your screen, it looks like a little speech bubble. So please feel free to insert comments, or I should say type comments or questions. Please also feel free to use the Q&A, which is right next door to the chat box, which looks like two little speech boxes together. I'll be monitoring that. As well, if you'd like, if you're watching this on Facebook, please feel free to comment. I'll be monitoring that as well. It's a very busy time, so that once Martin has finished with his presentation, we're going to open up the floor with some comments and questions. Martin has some questions for us as a group, and I'll be able to field some of those so that we can engage in a conversation. So welcome again, everyone. And today we have Martin Darby with us. Now, Martin is, I guess, a close connection with Gathering of Leaders. So we're really excited to bring him into our network at Episcopal Church Foundation. He is the President and Executive Director of the Institute for Servant Leadership. He is also the founder of, and I just want to make sure I get the acronym right, MRD Group, which is a leadership consultancy which works with church groups on leadership development, stewardship as ministry, and on reimagining the church. All such important topics for us to be talking about, thinking about, dreaming about during this really stressful time. So Martin, I thank you for joining us today, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Adrienne, and let me add my welcome to yours to everyone. We're delighted that you've been able to join us today. Would you join me in prayer to begin our time together, please? Gracious God, you have taught us in your word that we are members of one body of Christ, each with a place to fill and a function to perform. Be with us as we meet together in your name. Prepare us in heart and mind to listen to one another and to you. Enable us by your grace to make our varying contributions humbly and unselfishly, to work in love and harmony one with another, and to serve to your honor and not our own. We make this prayer through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. All around the world, a great deal has been spoken about leadership in recent times. As nations and communities have dealt with the coronavirus situation, so the role of leaders has been scrutinized more than ever before. And as never before, the application of servant leadership, when practiced, has never been more critical or more needed. Servant leadership is most often identified as being founded in the teachings of Jesus. He taught that a leader's greatness is measured by a total commitment to serve others. When he asked his disciples, who is the greater among you, the one who sits at table or the one who serves, he actually answered the question himself by telling them that they would say it was the one who was sitting at the table, but he was among them as one who serves. We recently celebrated Maundy Thursday, when Christian churches commemorate the washing of the disciples' feet. All leaders would do well to remember that the act was an unambiguous demonstration of leadership as servanthood. It is a style of leadership based on compassion and caring, not on domination and dictation. It is authority with those you seek to lead, not authority over them. It is anchored in empowering, enabling, and entrusting, not on coercion, command, and control. And above all else, it demands a brutal honesty, sharing the truth with all, and not trying to manipulate the facts or the people with whom you are sharing them. The experience tells me that when practiced, this style of leadership can have an astonishing effect on the culture of the community served. It becomes a kinder, more compassionate body, and differences of opinion are respected and sorted out in a good-natured, gentle manner. The interaction of the servant-led community with others also changes, and interactions are not marked by aggression, ridicule, and rudeness, but by friendliness, respect, and courtesy. In the early 1990s, a man called Robert Greenleaf, who had retired as a senior executive with the old AT&T, was inspired to write about his experience in his essay, The Servant as Leader. He came to the conclusion that a truly effective leader is always servant first. Greenleaf wrote that she or he is sharply different from the person who is leader first. The difference manifests itself in the care taken by the servant first to make sure that other people's highest priority needs are being served. And Bennett Sims, Bishop of Atlanta from 1972 until his retirement in 1983, and founder of the Institute for Servant Leadership, shared in his seminal work, Servanthood, Leadership for the Third Millennium, that he had been strongly influenced by Greenleaf's essay. He also wrote, "The ability to empower is what makes great leadership servanthood. It awakens the slumbering power in the souls of others. Servant leadership is neither dominance nor civility. Instead, it is the most enduring form of power because it is congruent with the relational way things work in the universe. Servanthood has the power to transform human experience and, in consequence, the character of God's interwoven world." In my own journey, I began my working life in a very old-fashioned conservative English company, which was marked by a traditional hierarchy. If my boss wanted my opinion, he would give it to me. When I was appointed to a senior leadership role, I became very conscious of the fact that I was living what Parker Palmer described as a divided life. I was one person in the community outside of work, but when in the workplace, I lived into the culturally assigned role that I had become accustomed to. It had to change. And so began my journey to adopt servant leadership as my modus operandi as an executive. I confess it was slow at first, and largely because of what I now see as an irrational fear that I would somehow lose authority. I would lose power, when in fact it's quite the opposite. The more you delegate and share authority and the power with others, the more efficient and effective the organization becomes in reaching its mission. So although it was slow in the beginning, the more I adopted and practiced a servant-first mentality and changed the way I would work, think, talk, and act, so we all experienced a greater trust, and the culture of our community changed. It was also extraordinary to experience the cultural shift that took place at the customer interface, and relationships changed there and improved as well. There is a story from long ago that illustrates how we might work, think, talk, and act, not just in this time of crisis, but also when we arrive at the new normal, or perhaps we might use the term better normal. A friend recently shared that using better normal helps him think about not just seeing what emerges as new, but maybe embracing some personal servanthood responsibility about trying to help bring forth something better out of the ashes. Once upon a time, there was a wise abbot of a monastery who was the friend of an equally wise rabbi. This was in the old country long ago, when times were always hard, but just then they were even worse. The abbot's community was dwindling, and the faith life of his monks was fearful, weak, and anxious. He went to his friend and he wept. His friend, the rabbi, comforted him and said, "There is something you need to know, my brother. We have long known in the Jewish community that the Messiah is one of you." "What?" exclaimed the abbot. The Messiah is one of us? How can this be?" But the rabbi insisted that it was so, and the abbot went back to his monastery, wondering and praying, comforted and excited. Once back in the monastery, he would pass by a monk and wonder if he was the one. Sitting in chapel praying, he would hear the voice and look intently at a face and wonder, is he the one? The abbot had always been kind, but now began to treat all of his brothers with profound kindness and awe, ever deeper respect, even reverence. Soon everyone noticed. One of the brothers came to him and asked him what had happened to him. After some coaxing, the abbot told him what the rabbi had said. Soon the other monk was looking at his brothers differently, with deeper respect and wondering. Word spread quickly. The Messiah is one of us. The monastery was suddenly full of life, worship, love, and grace. The prayer life was rich and passionate and devoted, and services were alive and vibrant. Soon the surrounding villagers came to the services, listening and watching intently, and many joined the community of monks. After their novitiate, when they took their vows, they were told the mystery, the truth that their life was based upon, the source of their strength, the richness of their life together. The Messiah is one of us. The monastery grew and expanded into house after house, and the monks grew in wisdom and grace before each other and in the eyes of God. And they say still to this day that if you stumble across this place where there is life and hope and kindness and graciousness, that the secret is the same. The Messiah is one of us. We are in the midst of a crisis the likes of which many of us have never experienced before. Here in the US, talk of the Great Depression, Pearl Harbor, and 9/11 have been comparisons. More than ever before, we need leaders who not only understand the astonishing impact that servant leadership can have on the present situation, but also the impact it can have on the final outcome. We will only get through this pandemic successfully if we work together and recognize that we each bring different gifts. It is the harnessing of these gifts, the respecting of them, and the sharing of them that will allow us to win the battle against COVID-19. As nations are gathering experts around the table, listening to their wisdom and knowledge, born from their unique gifts, yes, the whole will become far greater than the sum of the parts. So the church needs to gather its leadership around the table, listening to their wisdom and knowledge, born from their unique gifts. The call for church communities to adopt and practice servant leadership has never been louder, has never been more needed. The theologian, humanitarian, philosopher, and physician Albert Schweitzer once said, "I don't know what your destiny will be, but one thing I do know. The only ones among you who will be truly happy are those who have sought and found how to serve. Let us pray and hope that all leaders will find happiness in serving and lead us through this pandemic with clarity of vision, compassion and caring, and with respect and dignity for all. And let us also pray that our ordained and lay leaders of our churches will find that same happiness in serving. I'd be delighted to answer any questions you might have, but before I end, I would like to add and pose 3 questions, which we might want to ask ourselves and discuss in the time we have together on this webinar.
Sure.
So encourage you to take them with you when we conclude and use them in your own communities. Adrienne is kindly going to put them up on the screen for us.
All right, so again,
say again.
Just let me get those up here. There we go.
The first question is evangelism. As servant leaders, how are we approaching evangelism as we, I'm sorry, I've got to, I apologize, I've got that around the wrong way. Yeah, as servant leaders, how are we approaching evangelism as we offer a wide variety of online services and Christian formation opportunities to our parish communities? Can we find ways to be radically invitational to children and young adults, to the unchurched, dechurched, and those of other faith traditions who might find their encounter with the grace of God within Episcopal liturgies? And how do we engage the members of our parish in that invitational activity? The second question of stewardship. As servant leaders, how are we embracing the financial aspects of stewardship and giving in this present crisis? What steps are we taking as both ordained and lay leaders to re-examine our approach to stewardship in the present and in the future as a true ministry, and indeed as a ministry that encompasses the stewardship of the entirety of our lives, not only the financial support of our church's ministries? And third, mission and the future church. As servant leaders, how might we begin a visioning process of what our parish community might look like in the new normal? Many of us have started to offer a variety of daily services, including the beautiful rhythm of the daily office, to our parish communities. Will we offer a blend of virtual and actual church gatherings in the future? Might small group, house church-like worship be an important part of the organized church? How can we better serve the poor and needy in this time of crisis and in the new normal when we reach that point? And how do we empower, enable, and entrust our lay leadership in these processes? Thank you.
All right, there's so many buttons to push. Thank you so much, Martin. And just to remind everyone, those questions will be up on our ECFBP along with the recording of this webinar. So please don't fret if you weren't able to get all of those questions. We will be posting those as soon as possible. So that, as Martin said, you can take those into your parishes, to your communities, your vestries, etc. So I'd like to open up for questions or comments. Please feel free, as I said before, just at the bottom of your screens, there's the chat box. There is also the Q&A boxes right beside the chat box. So please feel free to type in there. And also I'm monitoring Facebook. So if you're watching us on Facebook right now, please do feel free to comment. I just wanted to share a few comments. The most important really is from Haley's mom, who says hello. So,
hi, Mom.
I just had to say that. That was lovely.
Thank you, Adrienne. Appreciate it.
Sure. And Martin, one of our questions from Glenn Johnson was to describe a little bit more about your work. So this is not about those questions, but just to explain a little bit more about the work that you do.
Yeah, the major part of my career was chief executive of the US operations of a global printing ink manufacturer. I began my career with the company in England and was sent here or transferred here to do some work with what was then an agent, a licensee. And then the company set up their own operation, and my career was as chief executive. And it was at that time that I felt this disconnect between my personal life, if you will, and my life in the workplace. That I was continuing to live into that role, socially assigned in a sense that I'd become accustomed to because that's the way I'd been raised in my early years in the business. And then I realized that I was living, as I mentioned in my presentation, this what Parker Palmer called the divided life. And it was at that point that I realized something had to change. I was actually very fortunate as I was beginning a journey into this adoption of servant leadership, which is based on my anchored in my faith, of course, that I was introduced to two people. One was Bennett Sims, who had retired as Bishop of Atlanta and had formed the Institute for Servant Leadership. And the then president of the Institute at that time was a man called Bill Jameson. And they both became mentors to me. So I was fortunate to have two men whom I respected enormously, and who were both really anchored and grounded in the whole concept of servant leadership, and had put it into practice in their own lives. So does that answer your question?
There we go. Mute. Yep, I am. Yes, thank you. And also, I should explain too that we'll be providing links to websites so that people can see more about the work that you do as well. I just made a note of that to make sure to post that up with further resources so people can continue with this.
Yeah, I'm presently with, most of my work now is Partnership for Renewal. I partner with a priest, and she and I formed late 2018, early 19, Partnership for Renewal, and that's my main ministry now. So if you post that, that would be the one to post.
Absolutely. And we do have our first question coming in. The question is, have you heard of especially creative or new ways that a particular church has adapted either their mission or outreach ministry or their worship ministry?
Yeah, we've been very fortunate to work with a number of churches in 2019. And we have discovered that when church communities, leadership in church communities begin to adopt this new approach to leadership, to see themselves, the vestries, if you will, to see themselves not as a board of directors, not as a management team, but truly as elected servants of the community, they begin to change the way they work, think, talk, and act. And that in turn begins to shift the culture in the broader community. I had mentioned in my question around stewardship, this adoption of seeing stewardship not as an annual fundraising campaign, but as a true ministry. And a ministry that encompasses the entirety of our lives, not simply our giving, that's an important part, but it also encompasses the stewardship of our health and well-being, both mental and physical, the stewardship of our communities, the stewardship of creation, the stewardship of our relationships, so on and so forth. And when the leadership, lay and ordained, begin to embrace that new approach, both in terms of the servant leadership piece and the stewardship of the entirety of our lives piece, then everything seems to shift. It's been absolutely heartwarming to see the growth and development that's taken place in the churches that we worked with during 2019. There's not one that hasn't made significant progress. And before we were on today, I received a call from the rector of a church we worked with, and he was just joyful that they were having, against all of the anecdotal evidence that's out there, they were having absolutely no issues with their stewardship. They were in fact gaining. So it does make a significant difference.
Wonderful, thank you. And as we're just waiting for more people to warm up their typing fingers, Haley, you had a question. I want to make sure that I reach everyone.
Yeah, I do have a question. And it's something that's been resonating in my mind for a while based on a conversation I had. But also in my role with Gathering of Leaders, I have the gift of leading an organization there to support creative leaders in the church. And Martin, early on in your talk, you used the phrase that servant leadership is authority with the people and not over the people. And that mirrors so well with something that I believe it was Reverend Tommy Dillon down at St. Margaret's in Louisiana on a call we were having said that he has to remember in this time of pandemic and isolation, as the leader of his congregation, he is in this with his congregation, not for his congregation. And that parallel really struck me. So what I would wonder for people who have leaders who embrace servant leadership, how can we support them in this time, knowing that they don't have the answers? We're looking at them for answers as leaders, but they don't. How can we, in a servant leadership type situation, support the leaders who are going through this with us?
Yeah, fascinating question, Haley. I think part of the issue lies with the leader. I think part of the thing, we have to recognize that when we're put in positions of leadership as a chief executive, as a rector, there is that there's that piece that says that you're in charge. It's easier for me to do it. I've got to be in control of this. And it's rather, it can be frightening to give that up. The belief that you will in fact lose authority and power if you share it. And once you begin that process of sharing and delegating it, you suddenly realize it's quite the opposite. It gets stronger. And I think that, so that's the first piece. I think that somehow we have to get our rectors, our ordained to not being critical at all, but the fact of the matter is that some of them can speak very well of Jesus' teachings on servanthood, but it's a little bit more difficult to practice it. So I think that's the first piece. The other piece is that I think we, as laity, we need to understand that we must stop looking at the clergy and say, you're the rector, you were appointed to this, it's your job, it's your responsibility. It is not. The whole universe is founded on the basis of relationship, of being in community one with another. So as much as we expect and want and desire and deserve our ordained to serve us, and they do so in very unique ways, they're the only ones that can stand at God's altar week in and week out and feed us with the body and blood of Christ. So we need to serve them too. And I think if we could get that dynamic going between the ordained and the laity in more parishes, then I think that we would see a cultural shift take place. And it's my personal view that unless we can begin to see that, the new normal or the better normal might be very difficult to define. Does that capture it for you?
I do. I think I love that you're taking that two-pronged approach. That the leader has to be able to embrace their vulnerabilities and share that, but then the laity also has to recognize our leaders are human, point blank.
And sometimes we don't see it that way. And I think our ordained leaders, it's a little bit, put your mask on before helping others. That takes on a different meaning, of course, today. I was thinking of the airlines, but put your mask on before helping others. So I think we should look to our ordained to say, come on, embrace this. But equally, the lay leadership needs to step up to the plate too.
Wonderful. I have, Liesel has been posting on Facebook, and I wanted to acknowledge, thank you for your comments and questions. One of the first questions is, how can we better equip from afar? So talking about kind of taking servant leadership, but now with social distancing and even beyond that, how does that shift the narrative in the practice, really?
If I'm understanding the question correctly, I would suggest to you, we churches, Episcopal churches around the country are doing things that they have never done before. Traditionally, we would attend in person a Wednesday night service, maybe a Thursday healing, lunchtime service, and services on Sunday. In the face of the pandemic, many are now offering morning prayer, at least 5 days a week. Many are offering Compline several nights a week, as well as the services we conduct on Sunday. I think that we can do more. I don't want to get off on a sidetrack here, but there's a fabulous initiative in the Church of England at the moment, which I think they're calling Faith at Home. And please don't think for 1 minute that I'm making light of the importance of the ministry of worship. I'm not. I believe it's very important. However, I also think that churches could find ways of serving virtually in other ways too. This initiative, and I hope I've got it right, I think it's called Faith at Home. It seeks to help families grow together in faith through virtual contact. It looks to share experiences between parents and children. It seeks to equip young kids to deal with the exploration of their faith together. Helps them to feel supported. It deals with, I think a couple of times they're bringing in really, really talented experts in the areas of child psychology and helping kids to get through this just a little more comfortably, and not seeing their friends and being isolated has been very, very difficult. The other thing I believe the initiative does is it's sort of created this network of lay and clergy leadership to serve. So I think in answer to the question about how can do this virtually, something like that is as important as the ministry of worship. Can we bring in an expert and have a Zoom conference as we do a service? Then there's going to be this workshop on this particular day. Have your children around the table. Let's do this together. I think there's opportunities there.
Wonderful, thank you. I have a comment, and I apologize. I just want to read it so that I get it correctly. But this is coming from, and I just have an email. It's d.apoldo at St. Chris Online. So thank you so much for your comments and questions. And here's the comment, which I find is very interesting, and I wanted to kind of get that out there. They write, I once heard a layperson say something like, stop talking about empowering the laity. We already have the power given us by Christ and the Holy Spirit. This was said at a renewal conference of clergy and laity. That statement has stayed with me and has indeed empowered me to work toward that person's vision. I thought it was a very important thing in terms of kind of the idea of empowering versus kind of the empowerment that is within us.
If we were to but believe it, that it is within us, and I think I think that Debbie is spot on, and I love the but I think that sometimes individuals need a little bit of urging to realize that they do in fact have that authority within them because of their birth in Christ. The other two pieces, I would say, need to be present too. It is simply not enough to help them understand that they're already empowered, and for that to be endorsed and encouraged by the ordained. We also need the enabling and the entrusting. And the enabling piece is making sure that we provide the tools, that individuals have the tools to do that which they're empowered to do. Give them the tools to do the job. Don't ask them to do something and not give them that which they need to get it done. And the other piece is entrustment. And it's, in my experience, it's vital to be sure that we are not afraid as leaders, as servant leaders, to allow people to make mistakes. I would not urge that you'll let individuals make big ones. If there's a big one coming along, you can sit together and say, listen, have you thought about this? And to steer it slightly. But a lot of people from childhood, I mean, we learn by things that didn't go right. To stop people from making a mistake because we believe we know what's right, I think is often a mistake. I think we often need to sort of step back and say, okay, let this one ride. And then there's the conversation, well, what happened? Well, da-da-da, really? That's great. Don't worry about it. Now let's move on. And so I think the empowerment is absolutely, Debbie is spot on, but the enablement and the entrustment are also very important pieces.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm glad you know Debbie. That's great. Haley, did you have a question that you wanted to get in?
Always. I always love having questions for Martin. A couple times you've used the phrase better normal. And I love the rephrasing of that. I know people are talking about the new normal. I know I say it all the time when people ask me how homeschooling's going with the kiddos. Well, it's the new normal. And I think it's lucky that we're in a place, in a situation that we can say there's a better normal potentially coming. And to recognize that that's not the case for everybody, but for those of us who are lucky enough that this could come up with a better normal. With this being, one of my fellow ECF staffers used this phrase, this is kind of a mountaintop experience right now. We're up here, we're in it, we're looking at this going, okay, what opportunities does this give us? But once we're done with social distancing, once we're back into a market of restaurants and day-to-day and extracurriculars, how can servant leaders and communities hold on to the better normal that we're thinking of now? How does servant leadership and how does this, what steps might they take, or how do we make sure that as we're building these new systems in or shedding what needs to be shed, how do we hold on to that once we're down from the mountain?
Yeah, I think that's it's a big question, isn't it, Haley? One of the things that I see as needed, and again, I really don't want to make light of the wonderful offerings that churches are making. I don't know how many emails and messages you get every day about this service is now happening, this service is now happening, this service. I mean, the number of morning prayer announcements I get is wonderful. And that is great. The ministry of worship is vitally important to us as Episcopalians. But leadership is also called to begin to frame that better normal. I would, if I were a rector, I think I'd be engaging my leadership in brainstorming that better normal. What might this look like? Things will not be as they once were. This pandemic has caused all sorts of new normals to be part of our lives. How do, when we reach the final new normal, how do we make it a better normal? And I think that it needs the wisdom of many, the engaging, the empowering, the enabling and entrusting of our laity, our lay leadership to begin with, and then the wider community in defining that better normal. And I think there's going to be some commonality from parish to parish, from church to church, but I also think there's going to be some uniqueness as well for individual communities.
Wonderful, thank you. Debbie just posted a wonderful comment. She says, I worked for a rector who used to say, that was an excellent mistake. So I just, that was quite cheeky, and that was well said. We do have several comments in terms of that engagement. One of my comments was, in terms of doing more of empowering from afar, do you find that it's a hard balance to maintain from kind of overreaching or overdoing oneself in terms of like exhaustion, is what I'm trying to get at, versus kind of, trying to find really that balance between leaders, laity, and forming those bonds to create that better normal?
The conversations I've had thus far, Adrienne, have left me thinking that people have a fair amount of time on their hands at present, and that they would love to be involved in a visioning, and not a daily exercise by any means. And I think we've got to be very careful and make sure that our ordained, our clergy, while offering all of these services, are not burning themselves out by offering all sorts of forums as well with their vestries and other lay leadership. However, people do have quite a bit of time on their hands at the moment because they're restricted from other activities. So I think the time is now, no time like the present, if you will, to begin engaging that. I think, I'd say with humility, I think those three questions that we posed and that you're going to post online, I think they're a wonderful starting point to begin a conversation, a dialogue with laity about the future. And I think that anchored in those questions, they can develop jointly some vision for how they will move forward with, we've never been terribly good about speaking about stewardship and evangelism, have we? If you want to evacuate an Episcopal church pretty quickly, get up and tell them that you're going to talk about stewardship and evangelism, and they'll be empty in no time at all. I think we have an opportunity to change that dynamic. I think there's when I think of these lovely services, and my goodness me, when people are exposed to the beautiful liturgy in the Episcopal tradition, many people fall in love with it. And I've often wondered in these days when we're offering all of these services, are we being radically invitational to friends and family, de-churched, unchurched, children? Would it be easier for an Episcopalian to email an invitation to Joe across the street than it would be to say, Joe, would you like to come to church with me? I suspect the email might be a little easier for that. So there are opportunities in the midst of this terrible situation that we're going through. There is light at the end of tunnel. Christ promises us that. Let's not forget it. So I think there are a number of things that we could do, and I'd come back to it and say, I think those three questions might form the basis of a lovely visioning path forward. And I'd be happy to answer any questions offline that people pose to you that to help that process.
Martin,
Wonderful.
Sorry.
Oh, good. Go ahead. Yep.
I love that you brought up those questions again. I'm watching the comments in the Zoom chat here, and Gregory posted, thank you. That was a good answer about engaging congregational leaders in envisioning the new better normal. I think that was in response to my question, which I had also taken a note on one of the phrases you said, which was the wisdom of many. And there's something about that that really defines servant leadership too. You are seeking the wisdom of many. You know, and to engage those questions with the congregations to define that new, better normal through the wisdom of many, this kind of puts a nice little bow on some of this conversation. So thank you, Gregory. We're thinking alike here.
I don't think it's, I don't think it's a mistake that God created each of us differently. There are no two of us alike. We are all unique, and to embrace the giftedness of all and the uniqueness of that giftedness in each individual. My experience in the workplace, as I mentioned in my presentation, the whole becomes far greater than the sum of the parts. I was once asked a question. I did a presentation on servant leadership for the rector of the then rector of Christ Church in Greenville, South Carolina, Bob Daniels, and he opened it up to the community. And I'll never forget a chap standing up and asking me the question, in just a few words, tell me what servant leadership is. And I said, I suppose if you restrict me to a few words, I'd say it's allowing people to be who they already are, not trying to make them into something that you want them to be. Letting them be who they already are, engaging their gifts as unique as they are. It's so I think your point and Gregory's point is very, very, very important. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm just being mindful of our time. Martin, do you have any final comments? Always the reminder that should anyone have questions and comments that they think of, you know, while they're cooking dinner tonight, please do feel free to reach out. But Martin, I wanted to leave it up to you if you had any final things to say before we close for today.
I merely expressed my gratitude that people attended, and if there's anything that the Episcopal Church Foundation or the Gathering of Leaders through Haley or I can do to serve and support you in the journey, I know I'm speaking on behalf of Adrienne, you, and on behalf of Haley, but I do so with a degree of confidence. Please don't hesitate to reach out. We're here to serve. Certainly, Donald Romanek, who runs the organization, the Episcopal Church Foundation, I know him well enough to know that he thinks in the same manner. And so any one of us, reach out. We'll serve you in any way that we can.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Martin, for joining us today, for sharing your wisdom. A reminder to everyone that later today I'll be posting a recording of this webinar I'll also be posting, excuse me, those questions that Martin posed to us for you to share with, as I said, vestry, parish, and around your communities as well, to start those conversations. And I'll also be sharing contact information should you wish to continue conversations with Martin specifically. Haley and I, we work at Episcopal Church Foundation, so we will share our emails and our phone numbers. So please feel free to reach out. And, you know, things kind of come up as we're thinking, as we're walking the dog, as we're doing whatever. So we are always here. So please reach out. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you to everyone on Facebook, on Zoom. Have a lovely morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you happen to be right now. Martin, again, thank you so much for your wisdom.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.